I'm sorry, I'm eavesdropping. Are you complaining about Premiere Pro or?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm complaining or just sort of suggesting it. It just might. I may not be compatible.
Here's a cheat sheet for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've been using Premiere for 20-some years,
Yeah.
on and off, and I've used Final Cut Pro, both the old version and the new version.
Yeah.
And join us. No, look. And I've got a lot of strong opinions about all of it. And I'm going to start this. We'll talk. Hey, Matt, are you joining us or?
I'm just wandering around.
Wandering around? Okay, I'm about to begin. I was just waiting for more stragglers to come in. But yeah, one of the things I was going to talk about today was Kadian Live. And there's a whole bunch of free and open source video editors that are emerging right now. And Kadian Live is leading the pack, in my opinion, of capabilities, stability, and speed. And if you've used Premiere Pro or Resolve, you can jump into a program like this pretty quickly. It follows all the same metaphors and basic concepts. So yeah, that's what I was going to try to delineate today, was not just say this is this and this is that. That would be a boring list. I've got to tell the story behind it.
Yeah.
My name's Brent Patterson. I'm a professor over at Buffalo State. I've been over there for about 9 years, and I know a bunch of the professors here at Canisius. Matt is my neighbor, the organizer of the BSides, and he asked me to help him with an art track for the BSides conference. And I said, sure, and then the tsunami of life sort of came over from the past 6 months, and I've been trying to recruit people, and like most people right now, there's a big need for just artists and designers and everybody of any skill. And so I asked people to speak, and they said, well, sure, but how much will you pay? And I said, nothing. And so most people were willing to speak for nothing. But I did get a friend of mine named Alexander Miskis, who's in Germany. He's going to speak for us at 10 o'clock, and he does some pretty cool stuff. I met him in Amsterdam a few years ago. But I've been a media designer for like 30 years, since right out of high school, and I have always I've always been a big tech nerd, and I love combining technology with creativity and using that technology wrong for creativity purposes, and it's always gotten me where I wanted to go, which sometimes is I'm not sure where I'm going to go, but if I mix things in a weird way or in a wrong way, then stuff starts to happen. But I worked at several large media companies in the 90s and early 2000s, and I had access to millions of dollars of equipment, and I learned it all, and one of my skills as an artist and a designer was that I could learn software quickly, and so I learned Photoshop in the mid-90s, and I took some of those basic concepts and metaphors and started learning anticipatory interface design. Like, if this software worked a certain way, how would another software work another way? And I learned to extrapolate and anticipate, and it allowed me to learn software quickly. So one of my favorite habits, or not habits, but pastimes, is learning new software. And I sort of see it as almost like a game where I can level up by knowing more software. And it has helped me a lot, because that way I can look at any given situation, and because I've learned so much different software, I say, oh, this one would be the best tool for this problem at hand. And so while I worked for a lot of media companies, I also really missed college when I graduated. So I decided to be a professor, and I went to grad school. And what I found in grad school was that access to all that equipment and software was very much more limited. The colleges couldn't afford all that stuff that I had access to in the media industry. And then when I became a professor, I started working for several different small colleges and universities. I would request access to Lightwave and Avid and all these major video editing systems and compositing systems, and there's no money for that. And so I had to do without. I had access to the Adobe Creative Suite, and my students and I, when I was in college too, we all pirated all that stuff. And back in the 90s, on a Macintosh, you could just drop Photoshop onto a zip drive, and then it would just launch. There was no dialing home or anything like that. So yeah, we all did that, and then the really expensive software had all the dongles that would prevent you from doing things like that. They would have lots of different factors of getting in your way. And now, and sorry, I've also got allergies, and I didn't bring tissues, so I'll be sniffling the whole time. But so anyway, it was 2006, and I was working at a small college, and I wanted to teach 3D animation because I did 3D Studio Max in the 90s and early 2000s, and couldn't get it, at least not a legal version for my computer labs. And that's when I came across Blender. And in 2006, Blender was very limited. It was a software that was created in the early 90s by Ton Roosendaal in the Netherlands. And my understanding of the history of it was that he created it for a company called Not a Number, which went bankrupt in the mid-90s, and the software sort of languished for the late 90s. And then they open sourced it in 2001. And over the course of the next 10 years, 9 years or so, it slowly went through development and made some incremental improvements. But then around 2009, more people started picking it up, and I had been already using it for a few years, and I started to teach the basic concepts of 3D modeling and animation with the early versions of Blender starting in 2006, because I thought, okay, this teaches the basic concepts and metaphors, vertices, edges, keyframes, and things like that. And whatever students learn from this, they could take into more sophisticated software, more commercial software, and the concepts would work. And that proved to be accurate when I saw students doing that. But then in 2010, Blender started getting a bunch more money, started developing much more rapidly, and they started improving their interface. And over the past 12 years, Blender has been rapidly improving and rapidly taking over the industry across the world. In North America, people tend to be a lot more reticent to adopt free and open source software in a studio pipeline environment, but that's not the case with my European friends. It's being adopted wholesale in every studio, and what I'm actually finding is that it's actually being used under the radar by artists and designers all over. And so one of the reasons for that is you can it's only 300 megabytes. You can drop it on any system with any platform, and it just runs. You don't have to worry about licensing issues or anything like that. So sometimes when an artist just needs to get something done, they find that they can just get it done without having to worry about all the licensing barriers, proprietary barriers, and so forth that the other software gets in the way. They can just go home and work on that software and not have to steal software and other issues. So I find a lot of people are using it, but they don't say they're using it, because sometimes people are afraid to say we're using free and open source software. But that's becoming less the case. So anyway, I started using Blender a lot, and it became my main tool, my main creative tool. And because I found it could do all the things I was interested in doing. But Blender isn't just a 3D modeling and animation tool. It's also a video editor, it's a compositing tool, and you could also do a lot of interesting procedural work. And so that made me start looking at other software that I could need, because I was always buying Apple computers, and I was always paying for Adobe subscriptions, starting in the early, since they went to the subscription model in the, about 8 or 9 years ago. And, but one thing I noticed is if you stop paying Adobe, and Adobe makes great software, I really enjoy Photoshop a lot, and I use it still all the time, but there's always that onus that worry that if you stop paying Adobe, you lose access to all your files. And that troubled me, but also I saw my students were still pirating, and many of my students, because I work at state schools, many of my students, they're on very limited budgets, and asking them to buy an expensive Apple computer, asking them to pay for Adobe subscriptions, there was just also some unfair practices. Like Adobe makes deals with SUNY and other schools where the professors and teachers get free access to the Creative Cloud, but they won't do it for students. And the school won't buy Adobe Cloud for the students. And there's also constant issues that my students are facing. They might have the demo version, and then they actually subscribe to things, and then the licensing problems just spontaneously emerge, and they can't access their work, they can't access the software. It's just, the software will work, but the proprietary aspects of the software is constantly getting in their way. It's constantly getting in their way, and it's just a big frustration. With free and open source software, you just drop it on your system. It actually uses far less space on your hard drive, and it just works. Does it work and do everything? Well, perhaps not as fast, perhaps not as well sometimes, but if you're willing to work with the software and tinker, it will, and you can get everything done. And so that's why I started to think about, oh, so you could create a full studio, like I used to have at large media companies that required $1 million in hardware and software just to get started. You can do that now with a $1,500 laptop and free software. And maybe even a cheaper laptop than that. You could buy an Android, because most of this stuff will actually run on, not an Android, a Raspberry Pi if you really want to be able to, but it'd be really slow. I've tried. So I thought I would start, and I'm going to try to pay attention to the time, and interrupt me at any time if you have questions, or if you see I'm doing something wrong. But my quest to get rid of all proprietary software as much as I can led me to say, well, what about operating systems? So I went away from Apple, because Apple computers, and they're turning back that now, but around 2014 or 2015, I realized that their machines were really expensive, really pretty, but not nearly as powerful as I needed them to be for 3D animation and other tools. I started looking for other devices. So what I found was Apple was trying to be more of a fashion company than a creative empowerment company like Steve Jobs wanted them to be. And I certainly understand that fashion is very important to people. But when I looked at the power versus cost ratios of Apple computers, I started trying other devices. So about like a gaming laptop from Alienware, it was okay. But the battery and everything was horrible. And so that led me to, a few years ago, let's see here, System 76. And they're a computer maker in Colorado. And they make laptops, desktops, and so forth. And these machines are pretty affordable, but because of supply chain issues, a lot of their devices are not available right now. But what I found was I ended up buying one of their laptops, and that's what I'm presenting on right now. This laptop is 3 years old, but it's by far the most powerful laptop I've ever used. It still is. And one of the great things about System 76 is that they also have service that's comparable to Apple's service. They don't have Genius bars everywhere, but you can call them, or you can send them a message and they'll respond to you right away. And they also have lifetime support if you buy one of their devices. They don't have a lifetime warranty, but they have a lifetime support. So you can email them and contact them anytime, and they'll help you out, and they're super nice, and they're not like some technical folks that will like belittle you if you're not a Linux programmer or something like that. But their machines all run their own custom version of Linux, their custom distribution of Linux called Pop OS. And so Pop OS is it's a derivative of, it's based on Ubuntu, but that's what I'm running right now is Pop OS on this system. And one of the things I always loved about Apple computers was the simplicity of the operating system and the consistency of that operating system. Like I have a Windows computer at home, and even though I've got the interface in dark mode, that's only followed for some of the things. And that inconsistency, even with Windows 11, is sometimes a little bit annoying. So I really liked, Apple's design sensibility, and what you'll find with Pop OS and a lot of distributions of Linux these days is they follow those same design sensibilities. So you have a taskbar down here, you have an application window for all your applications. This computer in particular, and I'm not getting any sort of kickbacks from System 76 for promoting them, but I've just had a really good experience with them for the past 3 years. But this machine, while it's over 3 years old, the battery still lasts many hours, even though it has a 2070 GPU, and it has an OLED 4K screen. So it's beautiful for typography and for most of my graphic design work. And so yeah, it's a great machine, and I can run all the software that I've come to really enjoy, except for Adobe software. You can't run Adobe software, own Linux. Adobe doesn't make Linux versions, and they refuse to. Though plenty of other companies make Linux versions of their apps, it's just Adobe refuses to. I don't think that's always going to be the case. But what I'm seeing, the trends over the past 5 years, is that more and more people are willing to try this other software, and it's becoming much more professional, much more stable, and much more capable. And so this trend of most companies like Autodesk, who makes Maya, 3D Studio Max, AutoCAD, and so forth, they cornered the 3D market. They bought up all the 3D software, and then to access that software, you have to rent the software. Adobe, you have to rent the software. And I heard some people call this the vampire economy, where you have to pay them every month, and for Photoshop, you might use 10% of the features, but you got to buy or at least rent the whole thing. And that's more or less the case for Autodesk and the rest of them too. And those 10% of the features that I use all the time were always available here. In fact, PhD students write the software and they discover the algorithms. Adobe puts a really nice interface on it and puts it in Photoshop. But now that's becoming available in the free and open source world too. And so I can do all my photography, I can do all my 3D animation, I can do video editing, I can do all of that on this Linux machine. And I don't have to be a computer scientist. I know a lot of you are, but I don't have to be a computer scientist. I don't have to open the terminal to make things work. So like their app store is very similar to the Apple App Store. So if I want to look for any of the graphics or anything that I need, so graphic tools and so forth. And sometimes the software can be a little bit, sometimes it's not perfect, but that's certainly true with Windows and Apple. But these are all and you can still install Flash if you want. This is like all the software that's in the category of graphics, and you just hit install and it's ready to go. And whenever there's an update available or a system, then I can I don't have to go into the terminal to update the system. But it doesn't automatically update in the middle of the night when you're rendering. So you get to choose what software you update, and it takes care of itself automatically. So you can do everything right from the GUI. You don't have to go to the terminal but you can if you want. And so the great thing about it is you can be as technical as you want to be, but you don't have to be. And so I think that kind of freedom is really, really important. Apple is moving more and more towards, and I see this in my students, and I don't mean to disparage Apple so much, but sometimes they just really get in my way. For example, students, they come to me as freshmen, sophomores, and so forth. They've been growing up in like an Apple iPhone, iOS environment, and when they only work in that environment, the software and the system actively encourages them to not care what's happening underneath the software, underneath the screen. In fact, they never have had to think about, and from Apple's point of view, this is a good thing. They've never had to think about where they're saving their files. They've never had to think about things like file extensions or file relationships. But if you're going to do anything technical, which graphic design and most of the work that we do is, they need that. And so it takes longer now to take them into a technical mindset from a consumption mindset. And so by default, Apple computers, and not so much Windows, but Apple computers especially, they obfuscate all of that technical side for the sake of making it easy to use. And whenever I help my mother-in-law with technical issues, you know that's probably a good thing. But when we want to be culture creators with this tool, we need to be able to think and understand and be willing to think about how that software works. And it's not magic. It's something that anybody can wrap their head around. But I'll just show you how this software works. So this is the operating system. I've got all my different screens here, different workspaces. If you plug in another monitor, you can extend the monitors really far out. It works perfectly with that. Working in multi-scaled resolutions, fonts and everything are completely compatible. Like I said, I can get all my work done. System settings and so forth are really straightforward. They're just like Apple, or very similar to Apple settings, except there's not a system settings and a control panel. There's just system settings here. And if you, because it's Linux, like if I come over to the power section here, and I don't want the screen to go, I only have these limits here, like 15 minutes or never for the screen saver or dim the screen and so forth. You can just open up the terminal and there's some simple commands that you can change to do all of that. It doesn't destabilize the system. There's not a system registry where you'll have to, where you can break things. But Linux is perfectly happy to let you go into a system file and destroy things. But these systems will warn you, hey, this is a system file, you probably don't want to change that. So in other words, it's not quite idiot-proof, but you can deploy them to average people and they'll already know how to run it. And that's what's really powerful about it. So HP has started actually selling computers just a couple weeks ago that are by default running Pop! OS. And I see that more companies are going to start doing that as well. And new updates come every day. So another interesting thing about this machine is, like I said, it's over 3 years old, and it's the only computer I've ever owned that's gotten faster as I've owned it. The software keeps getting better. And so this computer is now twice as fast as it was when I bought it 3 years ago. And I can definitely say from Apple experiences, that's the inverse of the Apple experience. It's faster. Now this machine also has had, to be perfectly honest, it's also had a thermal issue. And so that's why you see these temperature gauges up here. I had to throttle the CPU because it was too fast. And it's got an i9 in it. And they probably shouldn't have put an i9 in a laptop. It just gets too hot. But as long as I throttle the CPU, it's rock solid stable. Right? I don't want it to crash during a presentation. But so, have I generated any questions or concerns? Nope. Okay. All right. So, Pop! OS, and it works great with all my Office stuff. And you can even got all my Microsoft Office stuff in here. So, but it runs in a browser instead of the other issues. But it just makes it completely connects to all the Wi-Fi networks yeah. So I can stay Office organized and get all my work done. And during the pandemic, I taught all my classes online using this laptop. And it carried through. So it was able to do demos, screen grabs, or screen recordings and everything, all while running heavy software like Blender and so forth. But yeah, the calendar tools and everything perfectly merge with Exchange networks, and it just works. So that's Pop! OS. And LibreOffice, and I'm not going to cover everything on this list because that would be pretty boring. But I'll just cover some of the things that I do. So like LibreOffice, it works really well. It's completely intercompatible with Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and so it works just great for all my Office needs. But you can supplement that with running Microsoft Office from the browser or Google Docs, which works perfectly well. So I do a combination of all of that. But when I want to just write, I just come over here to Microsoft, or rather LibreOffice, and it's got a nice dark interface. It's constantly updating. There's a new version of software that's probably something else I've noticed over the past 5 or 6 years of living in an open source world. The software speed of it getting updated is increasing. A new version of Blender comes out every 3 months, and each version introduces 100 new features, and it always gets faster. And so that's why I say my machine's getting faster, is the software just keeps getting better. But typography and everything looks as good as it did on my Apple computer with a Retina display. And so, because I'm a real stickler for typography because I'm a graphic designer by nature, and Linux looks great. And you can put any type of font on it and anything, and it works instantly. Inkscape, I don't think I opened Inkscape. And you can open software the Linux way by doing a quick search like Inkscape, or you can do it the Apple way by opening it up from the dock. And Inkscape is a software that you can think of as like Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator. And it languished in slow development for about 12 years, but over the past 3 or 4 years, they've gotten a lot of funding and a lot of different grants. And Blender set the model of how to develop the software, how to get grants. Blender has a budget of over $1 million a year, and they have only a full-time staff of about 40 people in Amsterdam, but they have thousands of people that contribute to the software, but it gets channeled through about 40 people before it gets approved and then deployed. But they created a model for funding and software development that all the open source software is using now. So it's able to employ people, it's able to provide a great product, but it's always free. And so you feel, and I donate to Apple every month just because I use their software and I built a whole sort of career around their software. And so I should. But Inkscape is a great software for vector graphics. And the software only takes a few minutes to learn. It's intuitive. Sometimes if my students take an Adobe mindset to this software, they get a little bit frustrated. So we have to talk about that mindfulness of how we're learning software. And sometimes the software is written by computer scientists instead of artists. So there's some things that make you have to think like a computer scientist, the object-oriented programming of how objects are related or not. But once you can get past that, then it's fairly easy to learn. And most of the software these days has really good learning resources. So if you go over to inkscape.org, not Inkscape logo, then you'll find learning resources pretty quickly. But also, because of the proliferation of people making money off of YouTube, not a lot of money, but there's just countless tutorials online. Every problem that you encounter, and this is a weird thing I've had to learn, how to teach students how to Google things, so if you just write curved corners, Inkscape, there'll be 500 videos on how to do that. And so I have to tell my students, look at the age of the video, look at the ratings of the video, and then click on it, and can you understand the speaker, and so forth. But 9 times out of 10, every problem that you encounter, there's a YouTube video on how to solve it. And so the resources out there are vast. When I did this kind of work with proprietary software 20 years ago, you had a book, a manual. And if you needed help, you might have an email or you might have to call somebody. And so it was really hard to solve technical problems. But nowadays, if you know how to Google things, know how to use YouTube, know how to use Stack Exchange, you can solve most of your technical problems fairly quickly. And the cool thing is, let me jump over to Blender, where I had Blender open. There it is. If I find a bug in Blender, I can usually quickly report a bug. And what it does is it automatically, well, if I'm logged in, it'll send them a bug, and I can quickly describe what's going on, and I find it gets fixed within 3 days. And with most people that I know with like Adobe software, Autodesk, you can send a bug report out to them and it just disappears into the void. But these guys respond, and they really like it when you send them a bug. So my experience and there are bugs, absolutely, but they're fixable. And the cool thing is you can download the source code, and you can, if you know anything about C or about the software, you can fix it yourself, or you can contribute and say, here's a fix. So I have friends who actively do that. And so what you see is you have this fantastic community built around the software, because the software is yours and you're contributing to it. So so you have this relationship with the software that you can't get with the proprietary software, where it's them and you. But with open source software, it's us. And so so the students, they become more invested in the software, and they learn, and they can take it home and they can tinker even on their cheaper computers. The open source software tends to be able to be, it's runnable on older machines. My school recently updated our computer labs, but they didn't consult me before they did it. And they actually downgraded my computer labs. And so they bought a whole bunch of iMacs, because the notion is graphic designers need iMacs. And they bought these machines with only 8 gigabytes of RAM and 2 gigabyte GPUs and i3 processors. And so they're way below Adobe's recommended requirements for system minimum requirements. And I said, who made this decision? And so After Effects and Photoshop, they run like crap on this. But over the past 5 years or so, what I've seen happening is you'll see students sitting at my computer lab, but they're all on their own laptop in front of the school's computer. And they do that for several reasons. But I think the best analogy I can make is if you're a music student, you have a relationship with your instrument, right? And you want to take that instrument with you everywhere. You want to customize it. You want to put stickers on it. And you can take it home and you can tinker. And so the free software is sort of like that too. It becomes like their guitar, and they become familiar with it in a more intimate way, if you will. Speaking of Blender, this is Blender. And so Blender is incredibly powerful, the most and incredibly stable. So one of the things that I work on all the time is, and it's crazy processor intensive, is these volumetric nebula. And so my son had a tumor about 3 years ago, and I went to art school, and art school teaches you to overly question your work and so forth. And when he was going through radiation, he's fine right now, but when he was going through radiation, I just wanted an escape. So I started just making work that I wanted to see, which was goofy, nerdy space stuff, because I enjoyed it and it made me happy. And that's really taken off. And so if you like go to my website, which one is it? I'm now working on a bunch of nebula for planetariums, and so I'm able to render all of this right in Blender. And some of these processes, especially if I render them at super high resolution, even I have a 3090 GPU at home, it can take an hour per frame or so. But it used to be, the interesting thing is that because the software has improved so much, it used to be 12 hours. And so that speed, and also the fidelity is improving so rapidly, I expect in a year, that hour will be a half hour, and so forth and so on. And so the hardware and the software keep getting faster. So the things that I could not do before, I can now do with free software. And the fact that I can render these on this laptop is not something that was capable just a few years ago. And but I also do, like I said, strange experiments and so forth. But a film studio in London last year contacted me because I had been doing photogrammetry with free software called Meshroom. Oh, that's something I forgot to put on the list, was Meshroom. Meshroom is Meshroom is a tool that allows you, it allows you to take multiple photos of a room or of any space, and then meshes that together into it extrapolates a 3D model out of that. It only works with NVIDIA GPUs right now. But it allows you to take any photo. The photos can come from any camera, and you just take a bunch of photos, feed it into Meshroom, and it'll turn it into a mesh, complete with textures and everything. With the fidelity only based on the quality of the photos, how many photos there are, the quality of the lighting. And so I started doing experiments with this, but intentionally breaking the software, intentionally making things look gnarly and weird, and I started posting them to my Twitter account. And so a film studio called Dadbod in London reached out to me, and for 4 months we worked on a music video for an Irish musician. And so we took photos here in Buffalo, we took photos in London, we took photos in Dublin. We put them all together and made a music video using that process. And it was all built in Blender on this computer, on this laptop actually, because I have a better machine now. But and so this went on to win a bunch of awards. And the artist is called For Those I Loved. And we spent a ton of time dealing with color and lighting. Then the record company said, no, this musician prefers everything in black and white, so we had to take all the color out of it. And I rendered it in Blender has 2 render engines. A render engine is like what visualizes the mesh. And one is like a game engine, render engine, so it's super fast. and the other one is a ray tracer. So it's fast, but it's a little bit slower. It's better for shadows and so forth. This is done with the game engine renderer, so each frame only took a couple seconds to render. And so each character and so forth is photographed separately, and then we take those meshes and we put it all together into a separate space. This is my nephew on some stairs in my house here in Buffalo, and then the camera flies through to a field in Ireland. And then with Blender, I make the camera shake a little bit to make it seem a little bit more interesting.
I went quiet and I stood and I started to run from love, because you're told you need to grow cold to grow old. I was sitting in that same field beside me gaff, kicking through the leaves and the grass until two Garda rock up back pawns in hand and meet you crying for your mans. And this is no dramatics, this is no tales and 90s classics. You spend your whole life being brave and you hope that things will change.
Eevee and Cycle, you're talking about?
Cycles versus Eevee.
Okay.
Yeah.
This was Cycles.
This was Eevee.
Okay.
Eevee is the fast. It's built like a game engine visualizer.
Yeah.
But it's becoming more and more robust. Originally, it was meant to be like a scratch renderer for tests, so you could quickly see things. But it's become much more robust than that, and so it's nearly professional quality. It's still limited. For example, you can't have like reflective materials with volumes, whereas I can do that in Cycles. Like in Cycles here, I have this mirrored object. Where's the camera? I can have this mirrored object that reflects the volumes in this scene, but I don't want to get too technical because that'll scare people away. But Eevee can't do that. It can reflect everything, but it can't reflect the volume. But that doesn't mean it won't later. And as the GPUs keep getting more powerful, and as the software keeps getting more clever, more features get added every single, like I said, every 3 months, a whole bunch of new features come out. So it's incredibly powerful. And if you're working in a coffee shop and you've got like these node systems going on here, then you feel like you can tell people you're working for NASA. But the software takes a little while to learn, but it's not as complicated as most people think. I can have students creating interesting things in about 10 weeks of intense study. And what I love about this node-based programming system is it prepares students for a lot of other software. Because each of these objects here you can think of as a function, because that's exactly what they are, and you feed signals from one area to another. And so these are noise patterns here, noise signals, and I have these noise signals feeding into each other to create an interference pattern, and that's what's generating these cloud patterns. And it does it this used to be impossible to do in any realistic amount of time. It used to take supercomputers, but now it's fully capable of doing that. And technically it's just a sphere with a cube in there, and the sphere has a volumetric cloud. But that's what I've been working on. And so yeah, I've been also making these nebula sort of patterns for planetariums. We have a new planetarium above state, and so we're rendering these planetarium nebulas that we can sell to other planetariums, and we're using only free and open source software. I'm not interested in people not being able to make a living out of this, but I am interested in letting people who don't have access to immense capital be able to create content that they wouldn't be able to do before. Like I said, the whole point of this talk is that you can create a design studio with a minimal investment, $1,000 or so. And the fact that you don't even need an office anymore, you just need an internet connection, means that we're going to see a proliferation of content from the people who are willing to play around with this. So one of the things I've encountered and I've had to struggle against is established faculty and artists who say, well, that's, and I have this problem with IT people too. There's a specific thing, whenever I ask software to be installed on a computer lab, there's a specific question: is this industry standard? And I say yes, but it might not be right now, but it will be. It will be. And this definitely is becoming industry standard. There are several films on Netflix already that have been produced entirely with Blender. I know, what's it called? Maya and the 3, I think is what it was called. That was entirely produced with Blender, as well as Next Gen and so forth. There was a company in Toronto called Tangent Animation, and they recently disbanded, but they worked entirely with Blender and created a whole pipeline studio around them. But the industry is still they get a big project and they can hire hundreds of people, but then if the whole company is based around one project, once that project is gone, that's the visual effects industry. It comes and goes. So my friends in Europe, they tend to work more as independent contractors, moving from project to project based on who they know. And that's what I try to prepare my students for, is not working for a company, but working for themselves, creating a niche of visual styles and unique ideas that they can bring to whatever project that kind of idea is needed. And so this kind of software better fits into that model rather than the large studio production company. And so that's a trend that I think is going to continue, is independent contractors. When we can, I don't want to get political, but when we can not tie having health insurance to a job, then it's going to free a lot of people to pursue their own career interests a lot more freely, I think. So most people agree with me when I say that, but there's always this staunch, no, we shouldn't have insurance unless we have a job, which my website is running WordPress, by the way, which is a free and open source content management system. And I've been using and teaching WordPress in my web design courses for about 13 years. WordPress is 19 years old now. And I have had a love-hate relationship with it because it's always been a bit weird. But 2022, there's a new version of WordPress that came out. And it is super powerful, super easy. You can actually create a really robust, customized website without having to know any code. And it's very drag and drop. So my students in my Web Design 1 class, I teach them all the basics of HTML and CSS, and the basics of jQuery and JavaScript concepts. But then the new version of WordPress came out, which says you don't need to do any of that because it's all built on blocks. You can just drag and drop your layout however you want, build templates. So the concept was a bit hard this past year learning that, but new students will love it. And but you can still get into the code if you want, and that's the important thing here. Is on the surface it's super easy, but there's a door there that says technical side, and it's not locked. You can go there, you can customize it however you want, and so that's really, really powerful. And so you can go over to let's see, art and design, Buffalo State. If I go to my students, graphic design, and go to the student websites. All these students, I update this list periodically, but let's see here. All of these students build their sites completely with WordPress, and and they do almost all their work now with free and open source software. And so going back to that, what I was saying about industry standard, that got me thinking about 3 or 4 years ago about how software is actually marketed. And that got me into a talk called Don't Go Pro. And I went to Amsterdam at the annual Blender conference to do that talk called Don't Go Pro. And I noticed that all this software, like Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro, there's all this software out there that has the Pro as a suffix to its name. And what they're doing is, they're telling you this software is for professionals, right? This software, but they go further than that. This software makes you a professional, right? If you own this software, you're now a professional. That's the implication. And they're not emphatically saying that, but that's what they're saying. This software is a professional. If it doesn't have pro, you're not a professional. And I think it dilutes what it actually means to be a professional. And it's a subconscious sort of thing. And I've done enough marketing to know they're doing that on purpose, right? Like when you have a truck and you put tinted glass on the trucks, you can see other people, but they can't see you. You have power over them, right? There's a message there, but also trucks, like they're huge now. Why? But so I gave this talk in Amsterdam, and about let's talk about what this actually means, and how what it actually means to be a professional versus just having pro tools. There's actually audio engineering software called Pro Tools. So what it actually it causes is or used to anyway, it's not so much the case anymore, swarms of students who think in my classroom that the goal of becoming an artist and designer or creative culture creator in general is to learn software. Because if I learn the software, then I'm a pro. And it takes the onus of actually creating the content away from creating the content. Because they think, all right, I know Premiere, but what are you going to say with Premiere? What are you going to do with it, right? And what are other people doing? What has been done? And what can you do? When you take the onus away from the software, of learning the software, and put it on the storytelling and the messages, the images, and the relationships that you're trying to convey, then that puts the learning back at the core of where it should be. So what I started learning was that by teaching with free and open source software, my students' work was getting better. Not because the software was more capable, but because it put the emphasis on the message, the content, and the stories that they were telling, and not on learning the software. I told them, this software might not be usable in 10 years, but that's very much true with Adobe software too. It comes and goes. In 2006, I had colleagues telling me, well, you can only teach software that's the industry standard. And that, in 2006, if you wanted to do desktop publishing, that was Quark Express. And if you've never heard of it, that's because it's not the standard anymore. And if you put all your emphasis on learning software at the educational level, you're missing the point. It should be about learning how to learn software and then what to do with it. If that makes any sense. Right? Okay. So other software, Darktable is a great tool for photo editing. So it's similar to Lightroom by Adobe. And so you've already probably seen me using GIMP. GIMP is great for graphic design. It's a great graphic design tool for layout and raster images. Inkscape is a great tool for Illustrator. So and GIMP rather can open Photoshop files, even the newest versions of Photoshop, and it can export Photoshop files. So when someone sends me a PSD, I can just open it up right here, and for the most part, it works. What you don't get with GIMP that you get with Photoshop is the artificial intelligence stuff that they've integrated into Photoshop. Auto selections, content-aware scaling, but it's coming. It's just a little bit slower to get there, but it's coming. But those are features that I rarely use, except for the select subject. That's something that's pretty useful in Photoshop, but it'll come here as well. Many of you probably, if you're a gamer, know OBS, which is Open Broadcaster System. Great for screen grabs, screen broadcasting, and so forth. It works really well. Natron, I've met several of the programmers for Natron. That's an industry, it's a sort of a clone of the industry standard compositing tool that's used in the film industry, which is called Nuke. Nuke it's really sophisticated. Natron, I know from somebody that it was sort of a reverse engineered version. They wrote the software but by studying the software of Nuke. And so basically you can do some pretty advanced compositing. If you're into music creation, LMMS is a great tool for creating it's a digital audio workstation. And let's see here, new from template, let's do club mix. And so you can quickly put together, let's just put some random beats here. And I don't know anything about music, but if I need to create any music or anything, it has all these different synthesizers and so forth. It's really good at that, and even if I don't know what I'm doing, I can make something that people say, oh, he must know what he's doing, and it works quite well. And so that's pretty exciting. And in terms of game engines, Godot isn't anywhere capable of the intense verisimilitude, the intense realism of Unreal or Unity 3D, but it is capable of quite a lot, and it's completely free and open source. And all the software that's on this list is also available for Windows and Apple computers for the most part. But usually it's written for Linux first. And so if you need you can export directly from Godot for any platform, Android, iOS, and also the game systems. Or you can also export to have games run through HTML5 canvas, so that way it'll run in a web browser. So it's really quite capable, and it runs in a. The default scripting language is a Python derivative, but you can also run a C version of it. So it's really quite capable. I won't get into bespoke synth, but it's just kind of cool music creation software. So my students have this full, robust suite of tools, and I tend to base Blender at the core of it. Also, one other thing here, let's go to Kdenlive Live. Kdenlive Live is great for video editing, and it's fast, and it's fully capable. And so this is just like a showcase video I made for my students' work last year. But I use free and open source for almost everything I do. And so yeah, that's I know we're running out of time here. So, but what are your questions? Yes.
Is there like a better alternative for InDesign? Because that's one of the few ones that like has dating lock-in. Because like I have CS6 on my computer. My clients use the cloud InDesign. It's the most irritating thing on the planet.
InDesign has become the standard, and it is great software. It really is.
Yeah.
There's not a free and open source version that is as easy to use and as capable as InDesign yet. Okay. Now, Inkscape in the new version that just came out a couple weeks ago, they introduced multi-page editing, so you can have templates and everything just like you can in InDesign. But the software that tries to be the open source desktop publisher alternative is Scribus. And it is quite capable, and I've sent many works from Scribus directly to printers, and it works just fine. It's not as user friendly as InDesign, but it is fully capable, and it runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux. On Linux, it's my only option for full desktop publishing, but I can do a full pre-flight PDF, CMYK separations and everything, and it works just fine. And it's not developing as quickly as other software, but it is developing, and they've got new versions that are coming out now, and they work just fine. So I would recommend it, but with any of this software, I always have the caveat, give yourself a little bit extra time to learn it. But there are plenty of resources now, especially demo videos of how to make this work. One of my goals this summer is to start making more demo videos to get people started in this. But one of the things that I've had a lot of pushback against is elder faculty who are afraid of the software because they think it's not industry standard. But what I have found is that, like I had a student named Andrea, and she was really good at Blender, and she got a job at a big design studio. And I talked to her a few months after she got the job. She said, yeah, they only use Cinema 4D, which is another 3D animating tool. It's good software. I really like it. I like it a lot better than Blender. I said, great. I want to see the work that you can do. I talked to her a couple years later, and she said, I converted the whole studio to Blender. And so I definitely think that's the trend of things things to come. Thanks for listening to my talk.
Thanks for the talk. That is awesome.